P Diddy court case. Update: the walls are closing in. Most damning testimony and evidence revealed. May 2025. All right, grab a seat, because what's been unfolding in that New York federal courtroom? It's more gripping, more stomach-churning, and honestly, more unbelievable than any season of a high-stakes TV drama. We're deep into May 2025, and the trial of Sean Diddy Combs, the man who once seemed to have the world on a string, is painting a picture so dark it's hard to look away. Forget the flashy parties and the champagne flutes for a second. What we're hearing and seeing now are stories of alleged control, fear, and a systematic abuse of power that could redefine his entire legacy. For months, we've been anticipating this. Ever since those federal raids back in March 2024, the whispers turned into shouts. The lawsuits piled up, each one more disturbing than the last. But a trial? A criminal trial where Sean Combs himself is facing charges like racketeering and sex trafficking? That's a whole different ballgame. And let me tell you, the prosecution isn't pulling any punches. They're methodically laying out a case that aims to show a pattern, a so-called Combs enterprise, that allegedly wasn't just about music and business, but about something far more sinister. The air in the courtroom, from what reporters on the ground are saying, is thick. You've got Diddy, once the epitome of cool, now looking visibly aged, his usually impeccable demeanor showing cracks. His family is there, a somber presence. And then there are the jurors, everyday people tasked with sifting through what can only be described as a mountain of shocking claims. While Cassie Ventura's testimony earlier in the trial was undeniably pivotal, laying a harrowing foundation with allegations of rape and years of abuse, much of which the defense tried to frame as a toxic but consensual relationship, or to discredit her through questions about drug use. The past few weeks in May 2025 have brought forth new witnesses and evidence that have reportedly left the courtroom stunned and legal analysts scrambling. These aren't just echoes of past civil suits. This is fresh, raw, and in some cases corroborated in ways that are becoming increasingly hard for the defense to wave away. The insider who spoke, a former aide's chilling account, one of the most damning pieces of testimony this May came from a name most of us had never heard before. Let's call him Alex, a pseudonym used in court to protect his identity. A former personal assistant and fixer who worked closely with Combs for nearly a decade, spanning the late 2000s into the mid-2010s. You could hear a pin drop when Alex took the stand. He wasn't a celebrity, not an accuser in the romantic sense, but someone who was allegedly there, in the rooms, on the jets, managing the day-to-day of a man who lived an extraordinary life. And his story? It was like pulling back a velvet curtain to reveal a deeply unsettling mechanism. Alex didn't just talk about lavish parties. He talked about the alleged orchestration of them. He described in painstaking detail how he was supposedly tasked with procuring specific party favors, not just drugs, which he claimed were rampant and often used to incapacitate or ensure compliance, but also people. He spoke of lists, of types, of young women scouted from clubs, social media, or even aspiring artists who were allegedly led to believe that access to Combs' world was their golden ticket. It was a system, Alex stated, his voice reportedly low but steady. Mr. Combs had specific desires, specific scenarios he wanted to play out. My job, and the job of others, was to make it happen. There were NDAs, of course, tons of them, cash payments, and an unspoken understanding. You don't talk about what happens behind closed doors, ever. The prosecution pressed him on the offs, a term that's been central to many of the allegations. Alex's testimony here was particularly graphic and disturbing. He claimed these weren't spontaneous events, but meticulously planned, sometimes days-long affairs, often recorded. He alleged that women were frequently plied with drugs and alcohol, their consent dubious at best. He described specific instances where he witnessed women who were clearly distressed or unwell being coerced to continue participating. There was one time in Miami, Alex recounted, and according to courtroom reports, he paused, visibly emotional. A young woman, she couldn't have been much older than 20. She was crying in a bathroom saying she wanted to leave. I was told by another Combs associate, name redacted, to handle it, to remind her how much Mr. Combs had already invested in her potential. she stayed. The recording equipment was set up again an hour later. The defense, as you'd expect, went hard on Alex during cross-examination. They painted him as a disgruntled ex-employee, someone looking for a payout for his 15 minutes of fame. They questioned his own involvement, his own admitted facilitation of these events, trying to muddy the waters by suggesting he was a willing participant, not just an unwilling cog. They highlighted his own admitted past drug use. But through it all, Alex's core narrative of a systematic operation, allegedly directed by Combs for the purpose of sexual exploitation, seemed to land heavily with many in the room. He provided names, dates, locations for some of these alleged events, details the prosecution is likely trying to corroborate with other evidence. The corroborating voice, a witness from the fringes following Alex. The prosecution brought forward witness Jane Doe, Nurse 7, another individual testifying under a pseudonym. She wasn't an ex-girlfriend or an employee, but someone who claimed she was a frequent guest at Combs parties during a specific period in the early 2010s, someone who was initially drawn in by the glamour but quickly became terrified. Her testimony, often tearful, focused on the alleged atmosphere of fear and intimidation. She spoke of seeing Combs fly into rages, of witnessing other women being verbally abused and, on one occasion, physically shoved. But the most damning part of her testimony was her claim about a specific black book, or, as she described it, a series of encrypted digital files. It wasn't just phone numbers, Jane Doe, Nurse 7 alleged. It was notes, preferences, details about what certain girls would or wouldn't do. Sometimes there were codes or references to recordings. Everyone knew, or suspected, that things were being filmed. It was part of the control. The threat of exposure was always there. She claimed she once inadvertently saw a list on a laptop left open in a hotel suite, with names next to monetary amounts and what appeared to be travel arrangements. While she admitted she didn't understand the full context at the time, in hindsight, and in light of the trafficking charges, she now believes it was a ledger related to flying women in for Combs' purposes. The defense argued she was an unreliable witness, someone with a vendetta, perhaps someone who felt slighted for not achieving the level of access or fame she desired from her association with Combs' circle. They pointed to inconsistencies in her earlier statements to investigators versus her courtroom testimony. However, the idea of such records, if their existence could be proven through other means, would be explosive for the prosecution's racketeering and trafficking case. It speaks to organization, to a business-like approach to what the government alleges was a criminal enterprise. The evidence unveiled, beyond hearsay, encrypted messages and financial trails, and that brings us to the evidence. Because testimony, no matter how compelling, is one thing. Tangible proof? That's where a case can truly turn. In late April and continuing into May 2025, the prosecution began to unveil some of the materials allegedly recovered during those highly publicized federal raids on Combs' properties, as well as digital evidence obtained through warrants. One of the most significant pieces of evidence presented was a series of encrypted text messages and emails, purportedly between Combs and several key associates, including some who are also facing scrutiny or have been named as unindicted co-conspirators. According to prosecutors, these communications, dating back over several years, allegedly discuss arranging travel for women across state lines, messages like, "Get her on the PJ to LA by tonight," "Discretion is key," or "Package secured for Vegas weekend," are being presented as coded language for transporting women for sex. Payments to individuals, after alleged encounters, financial records, cross-referenced with these communications, allegedly show payments made from accounts linked to Combs' businesses to women or their handlers, sometimes cryptically labeled as consulting fees or appearance fees. Discussions about cleaning up after parties. Certain messages allegedly detail instructions to staff about removing recording devices, disposing of drug paraphernalia, or ensuring guests who might be problematic were handled with NDAs or subtle threats. References to specific recordings. While the existence and content of a vast library of alleged sex tapes remain a point of intense speculation and legal wrangling over admissibility, some messages reportedly allude to the footage from last night or making sure the Miami tapes are secure. One particular email chain presented caused a visible stir. It allegedly showed a panicked exchange between Combs and a then-associate after a prominent celebrity, name currently under seal, reportedly threatened to go public with allegations of misconduct at one of Diddy's parties. The email supposedly discussed strategies for containment, including leveraging business connections to pressure the celebrity into silence, and more chillingly, what prosecutors allege was a veiled threat against the celebrity's career. The defense is fighting tooth and nail over the interpretation of this digital evidence. They argue the messages are taken out of context, that the language is typical for a high-profile individual managing a complex life and legitimate business dealings, and that party favors could mean anything. They've also challenged the provenance and chain of custody for some of the digital files. But the sheer volume of it and the patterns the prosecution is trying to draw are undoubtedly making an impact. The physical evidence. Small clues, big implications. Beyond the digital, some physical items seized from the raids are also being highlighted, though perhaps more for their symbolic weight and corroborative potential than as standalone smoking guns. We're talking about multiple NDAs, stacks of non-disclosure agreements signed by various individuals, which the prosecution argues were part of the mechanism of silence and control. Prescription pads and loose pills. While not illegal in themselves, if prescribed, the prosecution is trying to link the volume and types of certain medications found to witness testimonies about drugs being freely distributed or used to coerce. Large quantities of cash and burner phones, items the prosecution suggests are indicative of an operation trying to stay off the official record. The defense counters this is normal for a wealthy individual who values privacy and security. Items mentioned by witnesses. For instance, Alex, the former aide, had described specific types of recording equipment he was allegedly asked to purchase and set up. The prosecution presented receipts and an inventory list from one of the properties that allegedly matched some of these descriptions. Similarly, details from Cassie Ventura's earlier testimony about the hotel hallway incident, like the specific type of vase Combs allegedly threw, are being juxtaposed with hotel records or staff testimony where possible. The famous 2016 hotel surveillance video of Combs assaulting Cassie Ventura had already been seen by the public and was a key part of her civil suit and earlier trial testimony. While its impact is undeniable, the prosecution in May 2025 seems focused on showing this wasn't an isolated incident of domestic violence, but rather part of a broader pattern of control and violence, integral to the alleged trafficking and racketeering enterprise. They are trying to connect the dots. The violence was a tool. The enterprise was the machine. The defense's strategy: death by 1,000 cuts or reasonable doubt. Sean Combs' legal team, led by some of the sharpest and most expensive lawyers in the country, is formidable. Their strategy appears to be multi-pronged. Discredit the witnesses, portraying them as fame-hungry, financially motivated, or unreliable due to their own pasts, drug use, consensual participation in a lifestyle they now regret. Challenge the evidence, questioning the legality of searches, the interpretation of messages, and the chain of custody for digital files. Contextualize the lifestyle, arguing that Combs lived a rock star life, that parties, drugs, and casual sexual encounters were part of that world, and that what the prosecution calls trafficking was often consensual if unconventional adult behavior. They emphasize that a toxic relationship or bad choices are not federal crimes. Separate Combs, the man from Combs, the alleged enterprise. Trying to show that any wrongdoing was personal, not part of an organized criminal operation, which is key to fighting the racketeering charge. Create reasonable doubt. With so many allegations, so many names, and such a long time frame, the defense hopes to poke enough holes in enough stories that the jury cannot unanimously agree on guilt beyond a reasonable doubt for the most serious charges. The prosecution continues to present its case, highlighting key testimonies and evidence. Alex's admitted complicity during cross-examination raises doubts about his motivations, while Jane Doe No. 7's social media history contradicts her claims of fear, suggesting she enjoyed a lavish lifestyle. As May 2025 progresses, murmurs of potential high-profile witnesses persist. The defense's cross-examinations reveal their strategy, but the jury's perception remains uncertain. The allegations are severe, prompting debates on whether to view the accused as a flawed man or a criminal kingpin exploiting others. Key evidence points to a systematic approach to procuring individuals for sex, with encrypted messages and insider testimony indicating organized illegal activities. If the jury sees this as a coordinated enterprise, the racketeering and trafficking charges become more serious for Combs. The case transcends celebrity scandal, delving into issues of power and consent. The coming weeks are crucial, and regardless of the outcome, the name Diddy will forever bear a different connotation. What are your thoughts on these latest revelations? Do you think the prosecution is building an undeniable case, or does the defense have a strong chance of creating reasonable doubt? Stay tuned and make sure you subscribe to our channel for continuous updates as this landmark trial unfolds. You won't want to miss what happens next.